Hello, and welcome to session 2, dealing with implicit and explicit bias. All right, so let's talk a little bit about bias. I mean, what exactly is this bias thing? And, well, how does that apply to us? Why do we need to know about it? If I know my content, why do I need to know about something else? Well, there's actually lots of different types of biases, but I like to break it up into two types. One is what you really think about when you think about the word bias. It's called explicit bias or conscious bias. That's the bias you think of. Think racism, think prejudice, think hate. That would be an explicit bias. It's where you're aware of what you don't like and do like. Okay. And that may be okay with food. For example, I don't like ketchup, but it's not okay with people and groups of people. And then there is implicit bias. That's more of an unconscious bias. It's a bias you have, probably a result of how you were brought up, the area you live in, your lifestyle. Basically, well, implicit bias is present in a lot of people who really don't have much of an idea of what it's like to be anybody but themselves. Okay. They see the world through a very small tunnel lens, and they don't think before they speak. Okay. So it's things that we're biased against. We have these subtle prejudices, but it's not this open hatred that you see. But, we're not biased. We're public educators. We are good people, right? We don't have bias. We love everyone. So, like, we're done, right? Wrong. We're all a little biased, okay? We're all a little biased. We just got to be honest enough with ourselves to admit it. All right. But as long as we're not like openly biased. We're not burning crosses in anybody's yards or anything like that. So, those little subtle and that's not really a big deal, right? I mean, that's just little subtle. That's no, wrong. Very, very wrong. In some ways, implicit bias may actually be worse than explicit bias. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but I'm not sure what bothers me more about implicit bias, and I have them, and so I'm talking about myself as much as I'm talking about you. I'm not sure what bothers me more, the bias, the actual bias, or the fact that sometimes we think it's okay, like we're accepting of an implicit bias, as an explicit bias is a huge no, but an implicit bias is, you're not really hurting anybody. All right. All right. So as educators, what do we need to do about this implicit bias thing? Why are we still talking about this? Well, admitting we have a problem is actually the first step towards recovery, okay? Or be aware, like pay attention. Look in the mirror and think about your biases. And you got to learn to be real honest with yourself on this one. And that's hard, remember? And you got to be conscious, and you got to be willing to have honest conversation with yourself, with other people. Like we have to be honest about things, and that's hard, is especially when it's a little negative. All right. So in my classroom, here's some things I try to do. Okay. I was a student athlete. I have a fairly good relationship, keyword from last session, relationship with my students, especially my student athletes. So I was a softball player, and so naturally I have a little bias against other sports. Now, see, this is a bias that you can talk about and nobody's going to start throwing punches. Probably there are some diehard baseball, softball people out there, but nobody's going to get real upset. But it's a good way to kind of introduce the concept of bias. So For example, I got a couple biases. One is golf. It's when we talk about facts, theories, hypotheses, and beliefs. I always tell them I don't believe in golf. I mean, I believe it exists. I just can't believe people watch that. Okay, yeah, okay, I'm joking, of course, and I talk to my golfers. I enjoy my golfers, and so we kind of joke about that because I got to throw the little ball up and take a swing at it to hit it, stuff like that. And then another one's cheerleading. We have competitive cheer, and growing up, cheerleading's not a real thing. Okay, that was just people who stood on the side of the basketball court and went, "Yay!" Okay, no, it's a real thing. We have a competitive cheer team. They won a national championship. They are athletes. They are truly, truly athletes. But it's still a bias somewhat. And I've talked about this enough in my class that sometimes when I ask questions, like for class discussion, I'll point out that that's a little bit of a biased question. And on the geology test, I had asked my students, if you put the geological timeline in the span of one calendar year, what holiday would the dinosaurs be able to celebrate? And the only, if you did that timeline, the only holiday the dinosaurs would be around for is Christmas. They'd basically show up the middle of December, do the Christmas thing, open presents Christmas morning, wake up dead the next day. All right. And I had a student answer. He said Christmas, assuming one celebrates that. See, that's a little bit of a religious bias, and in this area, it's acceptable. Like we assume everybody's like that, but it's not true. That's a little bit of a biased question. And note to self after these stories, being aware of our biases did not excuse our biases. Part of the reason I point them out in class is because I'm trying to get my students to be more aware of their biases, okay, as well as my biases. All right, you got to make the effort, though, to openly identify your bias. Start with the small stuff. Okay, have those small conversations first, and it makes those bigger conversations easier. I told you last session that we got to build a good relationship because we're going to have to talk about some tough topics that people take very, very seriously, and they can get very, very defensive. And another thing we do is just encourage everyone around you, students, other teachers, etc., to kind of do the same. And that's something I really do try to have honest conversations about in my classroom. All right, so I know what this bias thing is. I know what you're doing, but like, how do we identify our own biases? Well, one good way to identify your own bias is to watch for the M word. Ooh, what's the M word? It's a microaggression. Microaggression is the M word. So what is a microaggression? All right. Well, Poussin described it as death by 1,000 nicks. All right. They're little jabs. They're subtle jabs. They're socially acceptable jabs. They're statements that are okay and everybody's all right, but they have undertones to them, kind of like a left-handed compliment. All right. For example, well, you speak English well. For somebody that's probably not white and doesn't look like they're from America. Okay, that's just implying is like, well, you don't look like you're from around here. I'm so impressed by your English speaking skills. Or, wow, I didn't know they had women engineers. How cool is that? Or you throw like a girl, implying that girls are not athletic and girls are not smart, or that's retarded, or hey, this is my favorite. Hey, you're Asian. Can you help me with my math? Because you're Asian, therefore you got to be really good at math. Okay, these things, they're problems, they're issues, they're little comments that over time do a lot of damage. It demeans the other person. It's no different than making fun of blondes. Okay, it's no, we do it to women, we do it to different races, different nationalities, different genders. We stereotype, and it's hurtful. And that's a good place to start if you want to know where your biases are. All right. Now for the rest of the hard part. First thing we're gonna do, we're gonna debrief and talk about the relationship activities you tried in your class and see how they went, and hopefully things are going well. And then we got a couple little activities we're gonna do dealing with this. We're gonna do one on identifying microaggressions and a social identity wheel. And then you got a little homework, because guess what? I'm going to ask you to develop some activities for this one, just like I did the last one. And then I want you to implement them in your classroom. So we'll see how it goes.